Hi, everyone. So we still have like 14 minutes before the session starts. So please feel free to ask questions if any. A question is it possible to get a shell on MCOP DC without using the ADCS attack? Yes, that is the first thing that we are going to discuss today, how to escalate to enterprise admins in a default configuration of any forest environment. That is, let's say if ADCS is not configured, how would you do that? That is the first thing that we are going to discuss today. Any other question? Anyone else? No other questions? How many target shells do we need to have to pass the exam? So there are multiple exam environments. All of them have 5 target machines. So you need to have in all the current versions, you must have the ability to run commands on all the 5 target machines. So there would be total 6 machines in the target environment. One would be your initial foothold. That does not count as the target. So you must be able to get command execution on the rest of 5 machines. Another question about the exam is, would we need to perform persistence method actions in the exam, or RCE/domain admin privs and above are enough? It is absolutely fine to not perform any persistence or not use any persistence technique in the exam. We do not expect that from you in the exam. Any other question? I need to, as I always say, I need to keep talking so that the recording remains interesting. So one very common question that I'm asked about the exam is, and I think I've discussed that multiple times, but let me tell you that once again. So the question is, do we need to set up Bloodhound GUI on the exams on the student VMN exam? As I've been saying repeatedly, there is no need to do that. Keep a Bloodhound GUI ready on your host machine before you start the exam. So you just run the ingesters on the student VM and then download the zip archive that it creates and analyze it on your host machine. Another question is, at the end of today's session, can you give some exam tips or things to remember / be careful about? I can share them right away, bot, because I don't see any other questions and we still have 10 minutes before the session starts. So first and foremost, as I just now said, set up, if you plan to use Bloodhound GUI in the exam, Bloodhound in the exam, set up Bloodhound GUI on your host machine. That is one. The second, in some instances, rare, but in some instances, we have seen PowerView misbehaving in the exam environment. So if that happens, let's say if you run a find local admin access and it shows that, okay, you have admin access on a machine, but you cannot access it. You cannot actually access it. That means it's simply a false positive from PowerView. That's a couple of things that I know from top of my head. One more thing is the exam environment is very, very much like the lab environment, but it is a smaller version of it. It is a beginner's friendly exam. The certification is beginner friendly. However, it is absolutely not going to be simply point Bloodhound and execute. I mean, it is going to be similar to that, but it is not like that Bloodhound will show you a path to domain admins. There are a couple of, I would not say rabbit holes, but a couple of places where you have to apply mind, where you have to logically think that, okay, what could be the way forward? Why I'm saying this? Because a lot of users expect that they would get, let's say, run Bloodhound and get a path to domain admin right away. That's not true. Another tip could be, we have not patched the exam lab environment for a few months now. So and once again, we keep rotating the exam environment. So when you attempt it, probably by the time it would be patched. So some of the latest exploits may work in the exam. Feel free to use them. However, if you use an exploit, please be ready to explain it in the report. Make sure that you understand what are you exploiting and you can explain it in the report. Otherwise, I would refuse to accept it. So, all right. Other than that, do not stress. A lot of times what I've seen is because many of us are, all of us are professionals. That is, we work, we have a full-time job. So many of us are not used to appear in exams anymore. So make sure that you're well rested, never rush through the exam and never underestimate it. Right? Rarely I get angry emails from my students that, okay, I've done these 5 certifications and I've never filled in an exam. Do not take it that much personally, I would say. Right? There are a lot of users who would not clear the exam. So do not underestimate the exam. Take good rest. Do not try to rush through it. Do not think that you would be able to complete it in, let's say, 4 hours or 6 hours. Although there are users who are able to do that. At the same time, do not get overwhelmed. All right, practice in the lab environment. I think I have at least designed course good enough that you would be able to compromise the target environment. But if you cannot, do not think that I would say chin up, even if you could not clear the exam in the very first attempt. Right. So yeah, that would be my thoughts on the exam. Another question about the exam is, would we need to run Nmap or any service enumeration across hosts? No, tipsy ducks. Usual domain enumeration that we have been doing, that would be enough. Would you recommend doing it in a full 24 hours, or would you recommend stepping away and taking naps? Absolutely. If you check out the exam page, I even mentioned it there. Make sure that you do light exercises, take breaks, go for a walk, stay hydrated, etc. on the exam day. There is absolutely no way if you push it in 24 hours. I mean, once again, everyone has their own limits, but do not try to push it in 24 hours. Uh, okay, yeah, that's about how do you attempt the exam. When it comes to writing the report, think of it as a walkthrough. So, for example, a good template could be the lab manual that you have. However, in place of the command outputs, make sure that you use screenshots. So that is how I would expect the report to be. That is, you explain that I'm going to use this command because of this reason, I'm trying this technique. And here is a screenshot of the technique and the output. Would the tools be provided in the exam? Nope. Check out the exam page on the lab portal. There would be no tools in the exam. Do we need to crack all the scenarios asked in the exam? So the exam is a connected lab environment, just like your practice lab. So what I would expect is command execution on all of them, using whatever the scenario, whatever the way that you can do that, that would be acceptable. Another question is, if we compromise Kirby TGT hash and impersonate / start a process as DA, does this count as having DA, or do we need to escalate to shell somehow? Jake, I would suggest go for the shell. So that I need not go and check if there was actually, I mean, if there was an execution that took place on the DC or not. So I would say try and see if you can run a command on the DC that is foolproof. Another question is, why do we always use the non-admin version of InvisiShell in the lab manual? Strix, as per me, that is more silent. Changes made to HKLM are a bit more prone to detection as compared to changes made to HKC. So that's the main reason why we always use the normal version. Yes, Kipsy, sort of. So the question is the exam going to be like we get a foothold on a machine, we enumerate, see where our user has access to, and then repeat until we are dominating? Yes, sort of. So that's what the process is going to be. Check. Once you have a foothold, you will start with a foothold as a domain user. So check if you have admin access anywhere, check for services, check for ACLs, check for local privilege escalation opportunities, whatever we have been doing in the lab. As soon as you compromise a new user or a machine, repeat the enumeration process and keep doing that until you have domain admin. Are we going to discuss defensive side too as well? Yes, today we will discuss that. Another question about the exam is, will there be forest level scenarios in exam? You never know. So I can neither confirm nor deny that. So there will be multiple domains, probably in the same forest or multiple forests. All right, last couple of questions, please, so that I can start the session. A question once again about the exam is, say if there are various domains like in the lab, so do we need to get code exec on all the DCs? Absolutely. So in all the current versions of exams, there are going to be 6 machines in the target lab environment. One of it would be a student PM that does not count as the target. You have to have absolutely code execution on all other 5 machines, regardless of them belonging to a single domain or a forest or multiple ones. The last question that I'm going to pick up is, how many days before lab expiry do we need to extend if required? I would say just even a day before would be fine. Otherwise, we salvage the computing resources. So you may get a different student ID and your progress may be lost. Code execution as standard user or admins in the exam, even as the standard user is fine. Right, I've done that guy with the code. You have to check the recording for that. I gave tips for like what, 5-6 minutes. So the biggest one, once again, the 2 tips that I would like to repeat is, one, that if you plan to use Bloodhound, set up the Bloodhound GUI on your host machine. Do not try to set it up on the student VM in the exam. That is one. Second is, if you find that Power View misbehaves, for example, if you run find local admin access and it shows that you have admin access on a VM, but you actually could not access it. So we found that in the exam environment, sometimes this is a false positive from Power View. So make sure that you verify that using Bloodhound or AD-Money. So these 2 things you should keep in mind. The last question that I could pick up is PS remoting versus WinRM. The advantages, disadvantages. So I would say use WinRM whenever you can. It is a lot more silent and provides you almost equal features, almost, not exactly the equal features. So use WinRM when you want to stay silent. PS remoting when you need more features. And with that, let me start today's session now. Hi, everyone. Welcome to session 4 of Attacking and Defending Active Directory, the Beginners Edition Bootcamp. This is the January 2022 run of the bootcamp. All right. So I was about to start privilege escalation across trusts, but I believe I missed DNS admins, and there is a request for resource-based constraint delegation again. So let me pick it up from there. So when we discussed delegation in both unconstrained delegation and classic constraint delegation, the ability to configure delegation was available only with domain admins. Why? Because to enable any such delegation, you need SE enable delegation privileges on the DC. Now, in Server 2012, Microsoft introduced resource-based constraint delegation. In case of resource-based constraint delegation or RBCD, the responsibility to configure delegation or the authority who can configure delegation is moved from domain admin to the service administrator or the resource owner. That is, if you recall, in case of constraint delegation, there was an entry of service principal names in MSDS allowed to delegate to in the front-end service. Let's say on the web server, that would have an entry of SPN, service principal names, that would direct or control that, okay, this front-end service can delegate only to these particular SPNs. However, in case of resource-based constraint delegation, this is now controlled by a security descriptor of MSDS allowed to act on behalf of other identity on the backend service, let's say a database server or a file system. MSDS allowed to act on behalf of other identity is visible as principals allowed to delegate to accounting PowerShell. So this means that so the benefits of this is now there is less dependence on domain administrators, and it is the resource owner of the final backend resource that is accessed, they decide who can access a particular service on their machine or on their resource. But this also means that if you have right permissions, that is, what would make you a resource owner or a service administrator? If you have generic right, that is right permissions on a computer object, that makes you a service administrator or resource owner. This also means that if you have right permissions on a computer object, you can forcefully configure, not forcefully, I mean, you can configure resource-based constraint delegation on it and access that machine as any user, including as a domain administrator. In fact, there are just two requirements for that. One is, as we discussed, right permissions on the computer object of the target service. Other one is control over an object that has SPN. Now, this prerequisite is not a tough one to get. Why? Because by default, any domain user can join up to 10 machines to the domain. That is, any domain user can create up to 10 domain objects, 10 computer objects. Computer objects already have SPN, or if you have compromised a domain joined machine, then you can use computer object of that as well. With these two prerequisites, we can go ahead and configure RBCD on a target machine. For example, in the lab, we already have admin privileges on the student VM. So we would not need to join a machine. However, in our enumerations, we'll see that the user CI admin has right permissions over the dcorp MGMT machine. What does that mean? That means that as CI admin, we can go ahead and configure resource-based constraint delegation on dcorp MGMT. And what would be the user or account that we would configure to have RBCD, resource-based constraint delegation on dcorp MGMT? It would be our student VM or any other VM where we have admin access. You can use whatever you want, or even you can join a new machine to the domain. That is, create a computer object if you require that or if you want that. So using the AD module or PowerView, the example here is from the AD module, we can actually go ahead and configure RBCD. How can we do that using AD module? On dcorp MGMT, set AD computer, the identity is dcorp MGMT. We want to modify principals allowed to delegate to account and set it to the computer's variable or comps variable. Here, we are just as an example taking two computer objects. That's it. This configures RBCD on dcorp MGMT. Now we simply need to compromise this dcorp student $1 or whatever the machine that we have specified here. For that, let's extract their AES keys, and then using RubyS, S4U module of RubyS, as the dcorp student X user using their AES keys that we extracted, we would like to impersonate administrator to access this service HTTP, that is WinRM, on dcorp MGMT. Once this runs, we can access dcorp MGMT as the domain administrator. Once again, it would be a TGS. So you would not be able to jump from dcorp MGMT to any other machine. So when we say as DA, that means actually as a local administrator, we can access dcorp MGMT. All right, that is what or how we can abuse resource-based constraint delegation. All right. The learning objective we have seen in the previous session already, so I don't think there is any need to redo it. The question here is, in place of HTTP, can we use host? Yes, any SPN. In place of HTTP, you can use host, for example, RPCSS. You can also use CIFS, for example. You can use host plus RPCSS for WMI. You can use CIFS plus HTTP for PS exec, and so on. All right. Now, one more privilege escalation method. Okay, I just glanced over a question. Now, do not use WSMAN for WinRM. Use HTTP for WinRM. Another privilege escalation method, it is in the slides, but Microsoft actually fixed it in, I believe, in October or November 2021, is DNS admins. So after many years, I think I blogged about in 2017. It was not my discovery, but I recall, I think I blogged about it in 2017. So what was, or what used to be possible was, if you compromise a user who is a member of the DNS admins group, you could load arbitrary DLL with the privileges of DNS.exe. Now, DNS.exe runs as system on the DNS server. Now, because a large number of organizations also use their domain controller as the DNS server, this provides us an escalation to DA. All right. How would you abuse it? If you have membership of the DNS admins group, then both of the commands need RSet DNS. You can either use the DNS CMD command or the DNS server module to load a DLL. mimilib.dll is one such DLL that you can use for POCs here. All right. However, and once you have loaded the DLL, you need to restart the DNS service. Now, by default, the mimilib.dll just logs all DNS queries to this path. If you want to make any interesting thing out of it, you can, for example, run a partial reversion or whatever you want in place of just logging the queries to kiwidns.log. However, this has been fixed as of November 2021. I've kept it just for a couple of more runs of the class before everyone patches it. So that's about another privilege escalation opportunity. A question about RBCD is, why do we need student machine keys here? The answer lies here. How would you use dcorp student 1 or your student VMs? I mean, how do you abuse this RBCD? If you have configured this on a machine, the only way to use that machine, that is to make a request as that machine, is by getting the secrets of the machine. That is why we need AES keys of the machine here. All right. A question about DNS admin is, what OS was DNS admin patched in? I believe all the supported ones. Jake, not to be honest, I've not seen that in detail, but I believe all the supported OS would get that patch because it was assigned a CVE finally. So it was considered a vulnerability. It's not patched in our lab environment yet. All right, so now we can talk about privilege escalation across trusts. So we have seen multiple ways of escalating to domain admin. We have seen how we can persist with domain admin privileges. Now let's take a look at the next level, how we can actually escalate to enterprise admins. In fact, we have seen one way of escalating to enterprise admin already. All right. Which one was that? Unconstrained delegation. We saw how we can escalate to enterprise admins using unconstrained delegation. But in that case, we needed a misconfiguration that was, there must be a machine that has unconstrained delegation enabled. Is there a default way, that is, without needing any misconfiguration, can we escalate from domain admin to enterprise admins? Yes. Let's take a look at that. We are going to abuse an attribute called SID history. Now, SID history is a user attribute that is designed for scenarios where a user is moved from one domain to another. So that's the intended use of SID history. So when the user's domain is changed, they get a new SID, and the old SID, the old identifier, the old security identifier is added to SID history. Now we can abuse SID history in two ways, using KRBTGT hash or KRBTGT hash of a child domain, or by using trust tickets. Let's take a look at the trust tickets first. So let's say you or your machine on your behalf wants to access a service in the forest root. So think of this as MCorp DC in the lab environment, and think of this as TCorp DC. Let's say you want to access a service in the forest root. This is how Kerberos works in this case. Step 1, 2, and 3 are your regular Kerberos work flow. Pre-auth, that is, you request a TGT by providing a timestamp, etc. You receive a TGT from the DC. Step 3, you present the TGT and request a TGS or a service ticket. You pass the SPN, service principal name, or you pass the service name that, okay, I want a TGS or a service ticket for that particular service. Now the TCorp DC, that is DC of your current domain, checks the SPN and finds out that, okay, this is not in my Kerberos realm, but this belongs to the forest root. So in place of responding with the TGS, because it is not authorized to respond with the TGS, it cannot do that. The DC of your current domain responds with what is called an inter-realm TGT. That inter-realm TGT is signed and encrypted by a trust key. Now, of course, your client does not have access to that trust key, so it presents that inter-realm TGT to the forest root DC and requests a TGS. Now, at the end of step 5, the only validation that the MCorp DC or the forest root DC will do is if it can decrypt the inter-realm TGT using trust key. If it can decrypt the inter-realm TGT, it assumes that whatever is written inside it is correct and it responds with the TGS, and then you can present that TGS to the target service for access. So once again, trust key is what is the source of truth here. And that is the step that we are going to abuse. That means if we have access to the trust key, we can skip the first 4 steps. We can forge our own TGT here, our own inter-realm TGT, present it to the forest root. And once again, the only validation that the forest root will do is if it can decrypt the inter-realm TGT, and it will provide you access to whatever you want. All right. How do you get a trust key? Because it is a two-way trust, it would always be within a forest. Copy of the trust key would be available with both the DCs. See, so because we are discussing a scenario where we already have domain admin in our current domain, we can get the trust key from our own DC. Right? How do you get that? Using any of these commands, and the slides contain an example of invoke cards. Any tool, safety cards, better safety cards, or whatsoever that we have been using, run any of these commands as a domain admin, and you will get the trust key. The first one dumps all the trust keys from our domain controller. We may like to look for the in trust key from child to parent, that is in trust key from $corp to money corp. Or we can run a DC sync against the NetBIOS, the name of the TDO. So this would DC sync only the trust key. Or if you run this extracts all the secrets from the domain controller that would also contain the trust key. Once you have the trust key, you can use a command that is very similar to the golden ticket command. Let's take a look at the breakdown of it. So the module is still called Kerberos Golden. The next one is FQDN of the current domain, SID of the current domain. We'll come to this in a moment. RC4 is the trust key that you would extract from here. The user that you would like to impersonate, always make sure that you use a valid active domain administrator. The service that you would like to access, you may like to always keep it Kirby TGT, FQDN of the target domain, and file path where you would like to save the ticket. Now, what is this SID? This is the SID history that we are going to abuse. I was expecting a question here. When we say that if we have trust key, whatever we write inside the interleaved TGT would be considered valid. I was expecting a question that, okay, that is fine, but what are we going to write inside? So when we forge a TGT, we are going to write inside it that we have enterprise admin privileges. How do we write that we have enterprise admin privileges? Using the SID history parameter. So we specify that there is, this TGT contains a SID history of enterprise administrators. And this would mean when the forest root domain controller decrypts the TGT, it would translate and provide you enterprise admin privileges. What is this 519? This is a well-known RAID, relative identifier of the enterprise admin group, and rest of it is the SID of your forest root. All right. Now, once you have the interleaved TGT, you can either use Kikyo, the same a tool once again from Benjamin, and or you can use Rubius for that. All right. So, for example, when we are using Rubius, we use the ask TGS module, the path of the ticket that we forged, and the service that we would like to access on the DC. That's it. And then we would be able to access the specified service on the DC. All right, and that would be a learning objective 18. Using DA access to $corp, escalate privileges to enterprise admin into the parent domain using the domain trust key. So let's try it. The question is, why use one or the other? I assume that's about the service. Okay. So why use Rubius? Why use Rubius or Kikyo? Oh, in my opinion, there is no specific reason. Rubius is a newer and actively maintained compared to Kikyo. However, in Mimikatz 3, Benjamin has baked in Rubius within Mimikatz. So you can keep using that. I mean, just a couple of options. I don't see any difference. I mean, I used to always use Kikyo. I now prefer Rubius just because it is more actively maintained. So here, excuse me. So here, let's first start a process as the domain administrator of our current domain. Right, so let's start a process as SVC admin using Rubius. This process runs as the domain admin. Now we need to extract the trust key from the domain controller. Now we can either DC sync it or we can extract it from the DC. Let's extract it from the DC. Let's copy over our loader.exe there on the DC, access the DC, add a local port forwarding to avoid detection of loader.exe, to avoid behavior-based detection. Let's run hfs.exe here so that our loader can download and execute safety cards in memory on the DC. And finally run LSA dump trust/patch just to get access to the trust keys. Now recall in the slides, I said we need to use the in key from child to parent. That is, we need this one. Let me copy that. And that's it. That's all we wanted from the DC. Now from a process running as a local administrator, that is a high integrity process on our student VM, we can simply use better safety cards to forge an interim PGT. All right, the RC4 is what we extracted. This is the SID of enterprise admins. Let's run this. So this saved the ticket to trust underscore tkt.kirby file. Let's use Rubius to read that file and access CIFS on MCOP-DC. So if I run klist now, you will see that we have a TGS as administrator on for the CIFS service on MCOP-DC. So let's try to access that now. Then as you could see, we can actually go ahead and access the file system on the forest root now. All right. So please try to absorb the gravity of what we just did. Recall our discussion on domain trust. Now that is why in the very beginning, we discussed that there is a reason why Microsoft considers only the forest to be security boundary. This means that even if a single domain in your entire forest is compromised, someone can simply go ahead and escalate to enterprise admins, and that is compromise the whole domain. All right. So a couple of questions is, could you show once again how did you get the enterprise SID? Recall that we enumerated this very early. I mean, first couple of enumeration techniques, we did that. Right. So for example, if you run, let's say, get domain SID / domain moneycorp.local using PowerShell, you'll get. Right. Another question is, we can now connect to CIFS on MCOP-DC, but how can we get command execution? By using other services. For example, use host here, schedule a task, although not really recommended to schedule a task on the DC, but that is what you can do. Or you can use host plus RPCSS to use WMI, or you can use HTTP to simply go ahead and access the target using WinRM if MCOP-DC is not server 2016. All right. Another question, what is in one and out one in output? So because it is a bidirectional trust, it shows it as inwards and outwards key. But what we are interested is, okay, in-1 is the historic key, the one that was previous to this one. In-1 is the previous one. BK, that's answer to your question. The in-1 that we saw in the output is the previous one, the historic key. Please note that the trust key within a forest can change automatically if both the DCs agree to that. All right. Another question is Azure also insecure like this? In some cases, yes, there is a lot of improvement, but it has its own set of problems because a lot of services that were never supposed to be exposed to the internet are now exposed. So, yes. Right. Another question is, does this count as command execution in the exam? No, it does not. All right. So I'm going to show you if you really want that in the next learning objective, let's do that. So now this is very useful and provides you access to a lot of interesting stuff. If you really insist that I show you that right away, you simply need to request something like HTTP here. Now, if you check, you would have two TGS, and you can simply go ahead and use this. The reason I was not showing this, because MCOT DC is a Server 2016 machine, and we will get our usual error that we get when we use a TGS for HTTP against a Server 2016 machine. Right, something like this. Or there is no mapping between the user ID and the user ID and password, something like that. But this would work in the exam. So that is why I was referring to show you that. Right. So let's clear the tickets here. So this was fine. However, here, as you saw here, we need to request individual TGS for whatever the service we want to access on a resource. Now, in case you want an easier method, right? This included multiple steps. What if you want easier methods or an easier method? You can use something like this. So if you look at this command and compare this to your golden ticket command, the only difference between this one and your golden ticket command is this. The SID history of your enterprise admins. That's it. Absolutely every other thing is exactly the same. Right? You are still using the same Kirby TGT hash, the same SID, etc. The only difference between your normal golden ticket and this one with SID history is the SID history option. So why would this work? This means that you need not even extract the trust key. If you have the Kirby TGT hash, you own not only the current domain, but the entire forest. Why? The answer to that why is this. If you go back to the diagram here, let's use this one at this time. Let me use the original one. So previously, what we abused was SID history using trust key here. But recall, this implicit trust or trust means, this also means that the forest DC trusts this intervene TGT. That also means that who issues this intervene TGT? Your current domain's DC issues that intervene TGT. What is contained in the intervene TGT? Information provided in your TGT that you present. So in place of forging an intervene TGT, what we are doing here is We abuse step 3. We forge a TGT here that contains the SID history. That is, we present a TGT to our current domain controller that contains a SID history of enterprise admins. At the end of step 3, our DC validates that how? Just by decrypting it using the Kirby TGT hash, and then it would be normal as it should be. There is nothing that we need to do. We just need to inject a SID history in the TGT of our current domain. And that is what we do here. Absolutely nothing else would be required. All right. That is what the abuse of SID history with Kirby TGT hash is. What does that mean? That means if we simply go ahead and run this command, the same command that we have on the slide right now, if we run this, let me log off once. So if we run the command to forge a TGT, not an interim TGT, but a TGT of our current domain with a SID history. So a question is, would this technique work with parent to child as well? If you have, I mean, if you want to go from $COP to USDC, I mean, this is SID history. If once you have the SID history, you can move. Once you have compromised the forest root, you can access any domain. So there would be no need to go from DCOP to USDC. Once you have the forest root, you can directly access any domain or any domain controller. All right. Once we have this, now we need not use Rubius or anything at all. What we have right now is a TGT for the domain administrator of our current domain. What KList does not show here is the SID history that is available with this one. So we can now go ahead, access the file system, or we can go ahead and run, let's say, oops. We can run WMI commands. Right? Why I chose, no, come on. Why I chose WMI here is because in case of Win32 process, you can very easily use in place of GWMI, you can use invoke WMI method class Win32 process, let's say. Name of the method is create argument list. You can specify here if you want to use a PowerShell reversal, PowerShell.exe, and one of our download execute cradles. Not really recommended to run it directly on the DC, but just to show you how we can use it. IWR-use basic parsing and path to your reversion, whatever it is, evil server, or let me use my own machine IP here, for example. All right, you can use something like that. Or you can use win32 underscore service class. You can also schedule tasks if you want using SCH tasks. If you're looking for a more silent option, so because if there are tools like Microsoft's Defender for Identity or any similar tool running on the DC, code execution using schedule task or WMI or even partial remoting may be flagged as a malicious or anomalous activity. But you may like to use tools like sc.exe or sc shell that reconfigures an existing service on the DC. So the chances of detection are lower in that case. Right? Once again, we can try to use WinRM here, but because the target is a server 2016, you get an error like this. Okay. Is there a typo here that I'm missing? So let me copy that. But I mean, that would not work nonetheless. No, come on. So we have TGS for all the services that we were using. I mean, you can use WinRS or enter PS session, but not against server 2016 in this specific case. All right. The question is, just give me a second, let me grab some water. So a question is, as EA, can we access any system in the forest? Yes, because enterprise admins are added to the domain local administrators group of each domain. Now, if you insist, I believe someone would, that no, show me how I can get an interactive shell on the DC. I want it. All right. If someone really wants that and is not ready to let me proceed with the class, or for example, for server 2016, you can do one very simple stuff like this. Not very silent. I mean, I could always have showed you this one, but I don't want to set it up right away. So one thing that you can do is let's run a DC sync against the forest root. But because you insist on an interactive shell, let me do this. In place of CoreBTGT, let me request the credentials of the domain administrator. All right, that is the administrator of forest root. And then you can use overpass the hash with that. All right. Is that enough? Are you not entertained? All right. So that is how you can actually go ahead and get an interactive shell to, I mean, this overpass the hash. If you're using overpass the hash, then you can also use partial remoting or WinRM. The more convenient ones, you can use that as well. Now, there is not a problem, but this is noisy, right? For example, when you are running commands on the DC, what would show up in the logs is a 4624 and 4634 on MCOP DC, which is fine, usually, but also a 4672 special logon on or admin logon. Now, an admin logon from an administrator of a child domain on the forest root DC is something that you would not like to see or to leave in the logs. And this answers your question as well, user one, that do we need to clean it up? No, or in place of cleaning up the logs, it is better that you leave less suspicious logs, something like this. So in place of impersonating an administrator, you impersonate or use an account of the domain controller. In place of using a SID history of 519, we use SID history of domain controllers and enterprise domain controllers. Now, when you use this one, it would not be possible for you to interactively log on because DC accounts cannot interactively log on. But what you could still do is run DC sync against the forest rule. So this would be super silent in the logs. And this also defeats, as of today, this one is a valid bypass of Microsoft Defender for Identity or MDI. So Defender for Identity is the successor of ATA and specifically used to detect attacks like this, and this will bypass MDI. Why? Because this is not an anomaly. A child DC will always talk to the forest root and they would always replicate information amongst them. I mean, there is no anomaly here that MDI can spot. And therefore, this would never be detected. I mean, at least up to now, I'm aware of this I spoke about ATA, I think, in Black Hat in 2018. At that time, MDI was not even a thing. And this works right from that time. I mean, 4 years and still works and probably work for another few years. You never know though, but it has been working for that long. And I've been sharing this with my students from that time, right? So this is how we can actually go ahead and abuse this. And this was our learning objective 19, using DA access to $corp, escalate privileges to enterprise admin by abusing $corp's Kirby TGT hash. Any question? Okay. So now, once again, try and visualize why domain admins must be limited. Why number of domain admins and who gets domain admin privilege must be limited. If this was an environment, if this was a forest, where there would be multiple domains, multiple trees, and if even one of the domains in the entire chain was compromised, someone can effectively go from this to here, and once they are here in the forest root, the entire forest is gone for good. And not only the entire forest, probably across forest as well, probably. If it is a functional forest trust, then there probably there are chances that someone can move across forest trust as well. All right, so is this clear? How can we escalate to enterprise admins? Now, would this work across forest? And some student asked this, that would that work across forest? So how does Kerberos work across forest? So if this is the forest cross boundary, let's say this is DCorp DC, and this is Eurocorp DC, or EU, is it EU here? Let me quickly check that. If this is EU or Eurocorp, it is Eurocorp DC. So the flow is exactly the same. You request a TGT to your DC, receive a TGT, you show that TGT, and request a TGS. Now your DC realizes that that TGS, that SPN or that service does not belong to your current realm, but it belongs to the realm of a forest trust. So it responds with an inter-realm TGT. Your client then presents that inter-realm TGT to the forest DC, to the DC of other forest. The inter-realm TGT is encrypted using trust key that is shared between these two domain controllers. The only validation at the end of step 5 that the DC of other forest will do is if it can decrypt the TGT. If it can decrypt that, it will assume whatever is written inside the inter-realm TGT is correct and responds with the TGS, and then you can get it. Now, my question to you is, and please answer that on this call, can you get enterprise admin privileges across forest trust using this? If yes, then why? If no, then why not? Give it a shot. Do you think that we would be able to get enterprise admin privileges across the forest using this? So maybe it's not an answer. Give it a yes or no. That's what I was looking at. Yep. So the question was, can you get enterprise admin privileges on Eurocop here, for example, if you have domain admin privileges using the SID history? So can you give me some more yes as answer so that I can tell you how wrong you are and then feel good about it? So of course, no, you can't. You can't get enterprise admin privileges across forest trust. As Eraser mentioned and Strix US tells you now, a forest is the trust boundary. And the main reason what stops you, I mean, there are multiple things that can or that stop this. But if you ask me that what is the one thing that stops you from getting enterprise admin privileges across forest trust is due to, let me remove that one. Why can't we get or why can't we abuse SID history across forest trust? SID filtering. So what is this SID filtering? As the name suggests, it filters security identifiers at the forest trust boundary. What does that mean? That means that, and what does SID filtering do? It filters all the interesting SIDs, everything right from 500 to 1000 relative identifier, everything is filtered out. Your domain admins, enterprise admins, whatsoever you inject, this would be filtered out at the forest boundary. All right. So is filtering enabled by default across forest trusts? Yes. Can you disable SID filtering across forest trusts? No. Unless unless you mark this as a PIM trust and both the DCs must agree to that. All right. So that is what SID filtering is. And therefore, forest is considered to be a security boundary. However, having said that, if this is a functional trust, then you would expect that users here must be able to access at least some resources in the other forest. So what you would still be able to access is, let's say there is, and that is what we have in the lab as an example. Let's say there is a file share here that is accessible only to the domain administrators of DCOP DC. Or if there is a machine here or a SQL server service or any resource that is accessible only to the domain admins of $corp. By abusing this trust key, you would be able to access those resources. All right, that is what you can achieve. Any explicitly shared resources that are shared with your current domain, even if it is shared with the domain administrators of your current domain, you would be able to go ahead and access them. That is the best you can do across a forest trust. The commands are exactly the same. All right, you extract the trust key, then you forge an intervening TGT, then you use either KQO or Rubius to access the resource. However, you would see that here when we are requesting a TGS for the forest root, sorry, for the other forest. And if let's say we go for CIFS service, we can access only explicitly shared resources. All right. So this is an old name. It's not called forest share anymore. This is called shared with DCOP in the slides. Oh, sorry, in the lab. All right. Any explicitly shared resource would be available. Only that. Okay. Another question is, can we enumerate, or how can we enumerate what are the explicitly shared resources? So in case of, for example, file shares, after requesting a TGS, you can run NetView, for example, but that is going to be tedious because an SPN represents a service on a single machine. You have to request TGS for each service and machine, that is each SPN that looks interesting to you in the other forest, and then check if there is something that is interesting there. You can, of course, automate that, but that would be noisy. Another option is that you actually go ahead and, one, because you have domain admin privileges in the current domain, you look in documents, emails, etc., that what are the resources that are explicitly shared with users in the other forest. And then go ahead and try and access them. So is this useful? Not as much as within forest, but one additional benefit is the trust key. This trust key does not change as frequent as the trust key within a forest. So if you extract this trust key, you can use this for persistence to get access to the whatever resources you can in the other forest on demand. All right, so let's try this. Let me log off once again. I'm doing this frequently because we're injecting tickets there, and my student VM may not like it. So let's start our process as administrator. And let's extract the trust key. First, we'll start another process as the domain admin of our current domain so that we can go ahead and extract the trust key between $corp and EuroCorp. So we already copied loader.exe there in the previous learning objective. And we also added the local port forwarding. So I'm simply going to run safety cards here using that loader.exe. Okay, let me, I think I have to add that again. Okay, let me try that. And let's extract the trust keys. So what we are looking for right now is this key, in from our current to Eurocop. That's the key that we want to use right now. So let me use that one. Let's exit from this. And here, I will create an inter-region TGT. Oh, in fact, let me inject a SID history of enterprise admins. Let me quickly get the SID of the Eurocomp. Just give me a second. I'll copy that from the lab manual. So I want to show you how SID filtering works. So just need to quickly grab the enterprise admin SID history for Eurocomp. That's the one. So here I will add a SID history of the enterprise admins group for Eurocop as well. Let's forge the ticket again. And meanwhile, let me open up Eurocop DC. So and the password for this is excuse me. So up to now, we have not contacted Eurocop DC yet. All right, so what do we have here right now? It's just the TGS for our current environment. Now before that, let me show the logs to you actually. So this is Eurocop. All right, and now let's request a TGS from Eurocop DC. Using the ticket that we forged. All right. So we got the TGS. Now, what would the logs on Eurocop DC show? Among other things, look at these two audit failures, 4675. 4675 is SIDs were filtered. Who requested those SIDs? TCorp administrator. The SIDs that were filtered were eCorp enterprise admins. This is how SID filtering works. And this is pretty interesting. I mean, the SIDs were filtered, the SID history was filtered from this ticket, but you would still be able to access whatever you should as a normal user. I mean, not as the enterprise admin of Eurocop. This would still work. As you could see, we can access an explicitly shared resource. I do not recommend running NetView stuff like this, but if you really want to enumerate stuff, you can actually run NetView against the Eurocop DC as well. All right, once again, so what's the conclusion of this exercise? It is that we can access explicitly shared resources thanks to SID filtering if we forcefully set a high privilege state that would be filtered on the forest boundary. All right. So that is what privilege escalation across forests using the trust key is. All right. The question is, how do you get code execution in the Eurocop domain? In the lab, you don't. In any real environment, if you have access to a machine as a user in the $COP domain, then you can impersonate that user and access that. Another question is, and that is a very interesting one, why are we grabbing the RC4 and not the AES-256 key? Because still today in 2022, cross-forest encryption that is used is not AES but RC4. So if you go to on Eurocop or on $COP, and that is on any DC, you see this. Go to Active Directory domains and trusts. So Eurocop has trust relationships with $COP and a child domain. If you look at the property of $COP, you see that checkbox, the other domain supports Kerberos AES encryption unless this is explicitly checked. You cannot use AES keys across forest trust, or at least you should not, because there is no guarantee that it would work. I don't think it would work. All right, so that is why we are picking up AES, not picking up AES keys, but RC. All right. So that is how we can move across forest trust as well, although in a limited capacity. Any questions on whatever we have discussed now, up to now? So where we are, if we look at our attack path diagram, I think that's the one. Yes. So where we are right now, we have seen this just now. By abusing trust key from DCOP, we got access to Eurocop.local, but nothing very interesting. We could just access explicitly shared resources. What else we have done? We've compromised DCOP CI. From there, we have gone to DCOP MGMT. In learning objective 18 and 19, we have seen how we can abuse 19 and 20. We saw how we can abuse trust key from DCOP, how we can abuse Kirby TGT hash from DCOP to go to MCOP DC. Now let's talk about another privilege escalation method, that is using ADCS. ADCS, Active Directory Certificate Services, enables use of public key infrastructure, that is PKI, in any Active Directory forest. ADCS is huge. So we have been discussing all this time ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. There is a similar service called ADCS. So think of ADCS as that much huge service. So ADDS, ADCS, ADFS, these are some of the bigger services that need or that require a course on their own. So why would an Active Directory environment has its own PKI? Or why would you have ADCS in any enterprise environment? ADCS helps in authenticating users, machines, signing of documents, encrypting of documents, file system, signing and encryption of emails, and more. So if I quote from Microsoft's documentation, ADCS is the server role that allows you to build a PKI, public key infrastructure, and provide public key cryptography, digital certificates, and digital signature capabilities for your organization. So at least larger organizations you would find, larger organizations who still work a lot on-prem would use ADCS. Now, ADCS has always been in crosshairs, but recently, okay, that comes later. The introduction to paper from Lee and others, the paper on ADCS that comes in a moment. Before that, let's understand what ADCS is, or some of the components of ADCS. So some of the terms or components that you may like to get familiar with are: one is CA, the certification authority. So when you set up ADCS, there is a CA, an internal CA in your environment that is set up. This CA issues certificates for you. The server with ADCS role is the CA. So it could be a separate server or the DC. I mean, I have personally seen DCs that would have ADFS, ADCS, and the DNS server role, along with some file server role as well. All right, so make sure that you separate those out. But whatsoever, wherever the ADCS role is installed, that server would work as your CA. A CA issues certificate. So what is a certificate? This is the piece of identification that is issued to a user or a machine, and then that user or machine can use it for authentication, encryption, signing, etc. That is, it is the digital identity of that user or machine. Verifiable digital identity. Then there is CSR, or certificate signing request. So CSR is the fancy term. You can think of it as the request that a client will make. Okay, please grant me a certificate. That is what a CSR is. So when a user or a machine says, hey, CA, please provide me a certificate, that is what the CSR is. Now, when a CA receives a CSR, when they get a request, that request must be for a particular certification template. That is, a user may ask that, okay, please provide me a certificate for this certificate template. A certificate template defines settings for a certificate. That is, who can enroll, that is, who can request this certificate, when would the certificate expire, what could be the use of the certificate. This defines the use of the certificate. EKUs is extended key usage. So the certificate template contains EKU OIDs as well. That is, what the certificate can be used for. Can the certificate be used for client authentication? Can it be used for smart card logon? Can this be used by a subordinate CA, etc.? All right. Please make sure if you do not absorb all of this in the very first attempt, it is absolutely fine. All right. When I was creating these slides, although I have played, set up, and abused CS in the past for bypassing WDAC, it still took me a lot of reads and rereads and going through the documentation. So it is absolutely fine if you do not get it in the very first attempt. All right. So these are some of the components. Let's understand. This is taken from, I believe the diagram is taken from the paper. Have I referenced that? Yes, the certified pre-owned paper from the Spectre of Skies, Lee and others. I mean, this section, of course, depends a lot on that. Now, how does a simple CSR or certificate request looks like? Let's say there is a user who wants to request a certificate. They would generate a public-private key pair. and then sends a certificate request, a CSR, to the enterprise CA. As I said, hey CA, please give me a certificate for this template. Now the CA checks, does the certificate template exist? Are the settings in the request allowed by the certificate template? Is this user allowed to enroll for the certificate? After checking all of these things, if the prerequisites are met, the CA generates a certificate, signs it using its own private key, and sends it back to the user or the client. Then the certificate is stored based on the usage. If it is a machine certificate, it goes to the machine store. If it is a user certificate, it goes to the user store. That is how a simple certificate request works. All right. Now, there can be multiple misconfigurations, of course. For example, is the user allowed to enroll for a certificate? What if this is too permissive? If it is very permissive, what if all the domain users are allowed to request a certificate? What would happen in that case? In that case, if a certificate, let's say, allows you to sign a document on behalf of a user, all the domain users will be able to do that. All right. If the certificate's use case is, let's say, to work as a subordinate CA. Now, let's say if all the domain users can request a certificate that allows them to work as a subordinate CA, they can do a lot of damage. So these are the misconfigurations that can creep up. So look up the paper from Lee and others that details a lot of stuff. So what are some of the ways of abusing ADCS? We can extract user and machine certificates. So as we discussed while discussing certificates, certificates are digital verifiable identities. So if you have a certificate for a user or a machine, you can assume their identity. That is one. You can also use those certificates to retrieve their NTLM hash and then use, let's say, overpass the hash. You can persist on that user or as that user or machine. You can escalate to domain admin or enterprise admin. You can persist on the domain level as well. And this is a huge paper and this is a huge attack surface. We are not going to discuss all of these, but we'll focus more on this one because that is what our topic is right now, privilege escalation. Escalation to domain admin and enterprise admin. All right. So what are the categories that are discussed in the paper? So these are theft categories where we can extract a user or machine's certificate. So how can you steal certificates? Theft one is where you export certificates using private key with private keys using Windows crypto APIs. Theft 2 is where you use you export a certificate with private keys using DP API. DP API are user specific encryption method. You can think of it as that way. So this theft 2 is for user certs. Theft 3 is for machine certs. Theft 4 is simple, straightforward, yet very dangerous. You simply go ahead and steal certificate from files in certificate stores. Theft 5 is you use Kerberos PK init to get NTLM hash once you have certificate of a user. Then there is machine level persistence, that is local persistence as well. You can persist as a user by requesting new certificates. You can persist on the machine level by requesting new certificates for the machine, or by renewing the certificates in place of requesting certificates. I'm just taking you through this so that you have an idea of the width and breadth of how big the attack surface is. Once again, we are not going to discuss all of this, but bear with me while I take you through this. A very good question is, can you still export the private key even if the template does not allow it? Oh, nope. But in case of at least the client authentication certificates, the private key needs to be exportable. Otherwise, the users would not be able to sign stuff or encrypt stuff using those certificates. Right? Now, the escalation part is we are going to take a look at, I believe, let me quickly check that, as 1, 3, and 6. So what we have configured in the lab is escalation 1, escalation 3, and escalation 6. So ESC1 is where the enrollee can request certificate for any user. That is, if you have the rights to enroll in a certificate template, that is, if you can request a certificate for a certificate template, you can request certificate for any user, including a domain admin. As simple as that. ESC2 is where you can request a certificate for any purpose or no EKU. So this is potentially dangerous. The paper or the paper doesn't specify any usable abuse, nor is any publicly available use for this. In case of escalation 3, you request a certificate for an enrollment agent and then use that certificate to request certificate on behalf of any user, including a domain admin or enterprise admin. ESC4 is simple ACL related issue where the ACLs on the templates themselves are overly permissive. ESC5, once again, ACL related stuff where you have privileged access on the CA server or the CA server computer object. ESC6 is not related to a template, but it is a setting on the CA. If the edit F attribute subject alt name to setting is or flag is enabled on the CA, you can request once again certificates for any user, including a DA or EA. ESC7 is poor access control on roles on CA like CA administrator or certificate manager. ESC8 is very popular as well. NTLM relate to HTTP enrollment endpoints. This may allow you to escalate to EA even without having any domain user privileges. What are the domain persistence that you can use by abusing ADCS? Let's say when we talk about domain persistence, this means if we have compromised, let's say, the entire domain. So if you have stolen CA's own private keys, you can force certificates. You can inject, that is depersist 1. Depersist 2, you can create malicious root or intermediate CAs. Third is you can backdoor the CA server or the CA computer object. For example, what if you configure RBCD on the CA server? Right. So let's take a look at ESC1, ESC3, and ESC6. But before that, how do you enumerate if ADCS is in use in the target environment? So we are going to use a slightly modified version of certify. I mean, simply so that Defender does not detect it. So if we run certify.exe CAs, that lists the CAs in the enterprise CAs in the current environment. So if let me run this. If I run certify.exe CAs, okay, let me log off once. Probably issue due to the tickets. So is this my DA or Is this my VM or the DC? Okay. So let me run certify.exe. C is it is the DC. Okay, let me ask the DC to please reboot, and meanwhile we'll discuss this theoretically. And of course, I believe the reboot is quick. Just give me a second. So the DC looks fine. Okay, but let me reboot that. And okay, so what are we going to do first? As soon as the DC is back up, first we are going to enumerate the available CAs in the target domain or the target forest. So CAs option allows us to list the CAs. Find option allows us or gives us the templates. Then there is an optional /vulnerable. So certify.exe find vulnerable. What this does is it looks for any template that provides enrollment rights to domain users. So please always keep that in mind, that it does not mean that if a template does not show up in /vulnerable, it does not mean that it is actually not vulnerable. This only checks if domain users have enrollment rights on any template. That's the only check that this /vulnerable does. All right. So in MoneyCorp, when we talk about enterprise CA, we now switch our context to the forest root or the forest. So in MoneyCorp, there are multiple misconfigurations in ADCS. So there are 3 escalation paths that we have configured or misconfigured: Ask 1, Ask 3, and Ask 6. So in addition to the specific misconfigurations, there are some prerequisites that are common across all the privilege escalation paths. One is the certification authority grants normal or low privilege user enrollment rights. That is one. Second, manager approval for requesting a certificate is disabled. Third is authorization signatures are not required. Fourth, the target template grants normal or low privilege user the enrollment rights. All right. So my DC is up. Let me see if the CAs. No, that was not what I was expecting. So let me try that again. Quickly, I hope that it works this time. Can I access? Can I touch the DC right now? I cannot. However, I no, not kicked off the network. This is probably ADDS acting up. No problem. Let me think if I can quickly show you this on another lab instance. Uh, 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 See if I check. Just give me a second. Here it shows that ADDS is working just fine. Uh, okay, let me quickly request access to another machine from my team actually, because my backup one is actually also on the same lab instance. Just give me a second. So okay, so looks like that someone changed password for my student one user actually. That's the reason. So I'm just quickly trying to get that back on here. Ah, so let me quickly try from this one. I've got access to um, I've got access to a machine here, not this one. Okay. Ah, so as the new user, let me try that if I can. Yep, that's a problem with my instance, but that is absolutely fine, I believe, because we can proceed now. So when we run CAs, we can see that what are the certification authorities available with the current environment, right? Now, if we run, if you look here, one thing that stands out here is this, all right? One of the ask methods, the privilege escalation methods that we discussed, I believe that is ask 6. Edit F, attribute subject alt name. This is set on the CA. This is not a template related issue, but the CA related issue. This is a misconfiguration in the CA itself. So this is something that we can also abuse. We can run find here in place of CAs that lists all the templates that are available. All right. So for example, here, uh, our first example, now we can take a look at that. When we run /find, let's run find /vulnerable as well. Sorry, I forgot to do that. So find lists all the vulnerable ones, all the templates. However, you may like to always take a look at the enrollment permissions. For example, take a look at this one. This template HTTPS certificate has a problem enrollee supply subject. We'll take a look at that in a moment. Look at the enrollment rights here. And as we discussed earlier, find vulnerable lists only the ones where the domain users have any enrollment rights. So the only one that shows up here is, let's see if any one shows up here. I run /vulnerable. Do we have vulnerable ones? I'm just looking for that. If we have If I use the correct flag, these are the available ones. Oh yes, of course, a typo here. So let me copy stuff in place of trying and typing it. So let's find only the vulnerable ones. All right, so the vulnerable certificate templates now, as you would see, the ones where only the domain users have enrollment rights, only those show up as vulnerable. Recall the smart card enrollment one that, sorry, the HTTPS certificate one where the RDP users group had enrollment rights, that would not show up. So please always keep this in mind. Whenever you are looking at templates, always check for enrollment rights. Right? So once again, what shows up in /vulnerable is where the domain users have enrollment rights. You may always like to check the other ones as well. So for example, when we talk about S3, or let me skip S3 now. We wasted some time trying to troubleshoot stuff. Let me go through just S1 and 6 actually. If I have S1 anyway. So let's talk about S1 first. Now, the template HTTPS certificates when we simply run find here, you would see that the template HTTPS certificates has enrollee supplies subject value for the PKI certificates name flag attribute. What does this mean? This means that if you have rights to enroll in this template, you can supply the subject. What is the subject? Subject is the user for whom you request the certificate for. Now, because the enrollee, that is, you are supplying the subject, you can request the certificate for any user, including a domain admin. So if we look for HTTPS certificates here, that's the template. RDP users can enroll, that is, all of the student users can, and this is the issue here. This means, once again, subject is the user for whom you can request the certificate, and this could be a domain admin or an enterprise admin. That's what the ask one is. All right. How are we going to request it? Once we know that, please note that you can specifically look for those templates where the enrollee can supply subject by using this option to certify.exe. Now, how do you request a certificate? Simply using the request module from certify.exe. So let me do that now. So let's request a certificate for the domain administrator. From the CA, where did we get the CA name from? Whenever you're running certify.exe, you will get this CA name. The template we know is HTTPS certificates, and the subject name that we want to specify is administrator. and it will default to the domain administrator when you specify administrator here. So that is the certificate of the authority that we have specified. Oh, come on. Huh. Okay, I'll show you, but even if we face this one, I'll show you at least one of them. All right, we've spent a lot of time in actually perfecting this for multiple users. Not going to leave it like that. So let me actually quickly fix this one as well. Just bear with me for one more second. So, no, yes. No worries, no worries. I hope I'm still able to explain how this works. Meanwhile, I can address a question. How hard are these misconfigurations to make? Are these default or something a sysadmin would have to go out of their way to configure? I would say not very hard to make these misconfigurations. For example, the name of the template that we are using, HTTPS certificates, that actually copies. That is a copy of the web certificates, a default template. The misconfigurations that we have, I mean, this is something that you will most likely find in production. So nothing that is not real world here. So I believe this still booting up. So once we get the certificate here, we'll get in the text format, just like we have it here. We'll convert that to a PFX format and then use it to access the DC as DA. Right, let me see if it is up now. Okay, we got the certificate now. Right. So this is the certificate. If you come, if in a real assessment, let's say, if you come to this part, it's just a matter of time when you get your domain admin privileges. Why? We just need to save it as the DA. I need to use it on my other monitor to open up Notepad actually here. So we simply save it to Notepad and then save it as, let's call it ask1 dot pen, for example. So let's save it as ask1 dot pen. This is what I'm doing right now. I'm saving this as ask1 dot pen, the text that we got, the certificate that we got. And then we'll simply convert it as the tool suggests using OpenSSL. We'll convert it to PFX. Now it asks for us an export password. That is something we need to provide that we will use later on. So I'm going to use secret pass at 123 as the password. And now we have a PFX that we can use now with Rubius. So using Rubius, using its Ask TGT module, we are requesting a TGT for the domain administrator using the certificate that we have. And this is the export password that we specify. The question is, should we use loader for Rubius? As long as you are using it on your foothold, I believe there is no need to do that. Okay. And we'll get a TGT, which we didn't get right now. So not going to troubleshoot it anymore. Unfortunately, you have to take my word for it that this works. Right? It's not going to spend any more time on this one, actually, to be honest. All right, take a look at, absorb what I have explained, and please take a look at the walkthroughs for this one. All right, that's not working for me today. Looks like that, right? So this was our learning objective 21, actually. We need to check if ADCS is used by the target forest. We found out that it does. And if there are any vulnerable or abusable templates. And then we need to abuse such templates to escalate to DA and enterprise admin. Now, one very interesting thing with ADCS is, unfortunately not, and that is true for ADFS as well, we are not discussing ADFS, though, is not many people actually understand how to properly configure it. So such misconfigurations can very easily be done, and unless someone goes ahead and abuses them, no one would have any idea if there is any such misconfiguration that is even present here. All right. So that issue that you faced, Guy, with the code, and I faced is actually because of the multiple requests that hit the DC at the same time for template, I believe. All right, and this usually props up when a lot of multiple of you are trying it together. So that is what we have experienced in this case. All right. We still have one more learning objective. We spent more time than I was expecting on this one. In the exams, we have not configured ADCS. Very hard to automate its setup, very hard. The exam lab is an automated deployment, and ADCS is a beast when you have a GUI open in front of you. Very hard to automate it. All right. So the final thing in the attack part that we are going to take a look at is SQL servers. Now, SQL servers are generally deployed in plenty in a Windows domain. And they provide very good options for lateral movement. The biggest reason for that is you can map domain users to database roles. So what happens because of that? Let's say you compromise a domain user. In addition to checking that if that user has local admin privileges on other machines, we can also check if that user is mapped to a database role in any of the SQL servers in the domain. So that helps you in probably escalating your privileges, or at least to extract some information from a database. So the tool that we are going to use this for is a PowerShell tool called PowerUp SQL. So PowerUp SQL is the tool to go for if you regularly deal with SQL servers. All right. So how can you find out SQL servers in a domain? So let me import the module from an InvisiShell session. Oops. So let's start InvisiShell here and then import rather PSD1, not PS1. All right. Now, if I run get SQL instance domain, this runs SPN scanning. Now, what's the difference between scanning and SPN scanning? If I run this with verbosity turned on, it will be more clear. What it looks for is all those service principal names that start with MS SQL asterisk or MS SQL star. So this gives you even those SQL Server instances that are not actively listening on the network. That is, even if you cannot reach them over the network, they will still show you up. So a very good option of looking at these of the available SQL servers. All right. Now, if you want to check if you can actually reach over them, we can pipe this to get SQL connection test threaded that goes out and connects to each and every one, or you can directly run this. If you run get SQL Server info, that goes to each instance, tries to connect it over the network and tries to extract some information. So let's run this. So here, if I run get SQL instance domain, pipe it to get SQL Server info. As the current user, we can connect to a couple of instances on dcorp MS SQL. So on dcorp MS SQL, there is an instance that runs with the same name. The service is network service, that is no special privileges available to the service. It is a SQL Server 2016 developer edition, a 64-bit machine. And we do not have sysadmin privileges. Now, what I have observed is, unfortunately for many red teams and penetration testers, what you get to have is as soon as you hit something like this, that is no sysadmin privileges, a lot of times red teams and penetration testers immediately lose interest in that SQL Server. Please always keep in mind that SQL servers are databases meant, of course, all the databases are meant to store information. And that is what is usually goal of any assessment. So if you get to have access to a SQL server, always check if you can extract some information from it. Command execution is not always the goal that we are after. However, having said that, if you insist on getting a command execution, then database links or SQL Server links are something that you may like to take a look at. So what are database links? Let's say there are three databases here, A, B, and C. And a user has, let's say, public access, the lowest privileges that you can have on a SQL server. Let's say have public database role on A. Now, SQL Server links are direct TCP links that you can create between SQL servers to access other SQL servers or OLEDB data sources. So this means that if there is a SQL Server link between server A and B, and let's say the privileges you have here are for a database user called DB user. And from B to C, let's say you have privileges as sysadmin, the built-in sysadmin SA. Thanks to these database links, what you would have is from public privileges on A, you would have DB user privileges on B and SA privileges on C. Even if this is across a forest trust or whatsoever. Why? Because these are direct TCP links, they do not respect forest boundaries. I always like to make this dad joke so that it sticks with you, that database links are like love, they do not understand any boundary. All right. So always make sure that you check database links. These are very popular across the enterprises. And if you have not seen this, then this means that you were not looking for it. Right? So, I mean, the guys at NetSPI who wrote this tool, they have, in their DerbyCon talk a few years back, they said that they have seen up to 128 database link nodes. So, I mean, you cannot even mark them ABC here. The maximum that I have seen is 8 nodes. And I lost my sanity just with that. All right. So this is what database links are pretty useful for. And that is what we are going to do in this learning objective. Now, how do we search for database links? We can use get SQL Server link from PowerUp SQL, or we can run this command on the SQL Server where we have any access, even if it is public privileges. So let's run get SQL Server link. Let me copy that. Well, let me just run it. Get SQL Server link on the instance dcorp ms SQL. Let's turn the verbosity on. So what do we have here? From dcorp ms SQL, do we have a database link? Yes, we have one. What is the name of the database link? dcorp SQL1. So in all probability, the database link name is used as the same one where this link connects to. Is there a way where we can crawl this, because there could be multiple links? Yes, we can use get SQL Server link crawl. That, as the name suggests, if we make it get SQL Server link crawl, that actually goes through all the SQL Server links as long as there are any. All right, so what do we have here? Remember to run it with a verbosity turned on so that you can take a look at what is happening here. So the first link is dcorp ms SQL, the instance where we have any privileges. The link login is student 512. Do we have sysadmin? No. This dcorp ms SQL links to dcorp SQL1. On dcorp SQL1, the link login is a user called db link user, but we still do not have sysadmin privileges. Now, dcorp SQL1 is connected to dcorp mgmt. On dcorp mgmt, the link login is SQL user. We still do not have sysadmin privileges. Now dcorp mgmt connects to eusql.eu.eurocop.local, which makes the chain to be of 4 nodes. And finally, here the link login is SA and we have sysadmin privileges. All right. So a question is, there could be a point where our user doesn't have access, but say user 2 has access to it. So we first need to compromise user 2. Please note that, guide with the code, in that case, we would not be able to enumerate this. We are able to enumerate this because our current user has at least the public role on the very first node. All right, so that is at least that would be required here. Otherwise, we would not be able to enumerate all of this. All right. Now, there could be multiple scenarios that we can take a look at. For example, something that I actually discuss in the advanced course is, let's say if we have access to this particular server, we can make some changes to the database link and then jump to EUSQL, but that is a bit more advanced. So to emphasize the importance of database links, what we assume one thing, we assume that on EUSQL, XPCMD shell is already turned on. Please note that you will rarely find XPCMD shell to be actually turned on in a production environment. But to emphasize the point, I've already done that in the lab. So if I run this command now, what are we doing? Now we are once again running the SQL Server link crawl, but we want to run a custom query. Using XPCMD shell, we simply want to run whoami on all the instances in the node, all the node in the chain. So do we have any output of custom query on any of the nodes in the chain? Nowhere other than the SQL Server running on EUSQL. Here we see that the service that we have is network service, the privileges that we have. All right. Now, here's a question for you. Is this interesting? Is this service any interesting? Why? If you say yes, why is it interesting? No, I'm not system. This is not system. That is system. This is a network service, a low privilege service. Yes, exactly. Service accounts are awesome for privilege escalation. SE adjust token privilege. So you can use the potato category of abuses to escalate to system. That is one. Now, let's say if even that was not the case, please always keep in mind, we ran a whoami here on the SQL Server. So this is the SQL Server service account, and SQL Server service account would always be the sysadmin on the SQL Server. What does that mean? That means if you use this to get a reverse shell on EUSQL, on the OS level, you would be limited to very low privileges, but on the SQL Server level, you would have sysadmin privileges. All right. So you can extract whatever the information is stored in that particular SQL Server. But we are not interested into that right now. What we are interested in right now is getting a reverse shell. So let me start a Netcat listener here. That listens on port 443. And let me start HFS as well. So if I go to tools directory and run HFS, what do we have here is invoke partial TCP X or EX. So invoke partial TCP EX is nothing but this. I copy invoke partial TP, rename it to EX, and then simply make a function call at the very end of it. So I have to move monitors for that. You see this function call here, right at the very end. That is what is the difference between invoke partial TCP and invoke partial TCP EX. All right. And because this is a new machine, let me just double check the IP. Yes, that's the correct one. And we have the listener. Let me host the reverse shell on HFS. Let's run it now. So now in place of who am I, previously what we ran was this command. We simply ran a who am I. Now in place of that who am I, we are running a simple PowerShell one-line download execute. All right, so I have to change the IP here. Let me quickly do that. It is going to be 100.72. And that's right. Now I forgot to turn on the verbosity, but I believe we will still be fine. So here on my listener, I'm going to connect back and let me quickly see if I get a connect back. We got it as network service on EU SQL. Now this would have two interesting things: sysadmin privileges on the SQL server, and in addition to that, opportunity to escalate privileges. All right, and of course, I see impersonate as well, a better one. Now, a question is there a path to elevate privileges from EU SQL machine and get access to EU.Eurocop? I mean, there is no intended path, but you can play with this if you want, at least this one, but there is no such intended path. So that was our learning objective 22. Get a reverse shell on a SQL server in Eurocop Forest by abusing the database links. Now, I wanted to spend more time actually on the defense part, but let's see, whatever we can discuss, it would be very fruitful, at least. So we can split the detection and defense in 5 categories. So when we talk about these 5 categories, think of these as both work culture and architectural changes. All right. So you may like to protect and limit your domain admins. That is one. isolate administrative workstations, secure your local administrators. You may like to have time-bound and just enough administration. And finally, you need to isolate administrators in a separate forest for breach containment using tiers and ESA. So let's take a look at them one by one. So how do you protect and limit domain admins? Or what is the idea? So you may like to reduce the number of domain admins in your environment. All right. I have personally seen environments where up to 20–25% of the users and service accounts would have domain admin privileges. All right. The most important thing I would say is to absolutely never run a service with domain admin users. If you ask me if there is an Active Directory SYN, I would say if you run a service that has domain admin privileges, you would be called out on the judgment day. Why? A very simple reason for that is there are many credential theft protection mechanisms, even the free ones like Credential Guard or the protected users group. All of these are rendered useless for a service account. Why? Because the service account passwords are stored in the LSS secrets in registry. And none of these fancy credential theft protection mechanisms protect extracting credentials from the registry key. They protect the memory of the LSS process. So never do that. And also you may like to set account is sensitive and cannot be delegated for domain admins. Now, how do you achieve this? What is the control that can help you in achieving that? That is the protected users group. Now, in the protected users group, please do not confuse this with the protected groups that we saw earlier. In case of protected users group, this was a group that was introduced in Server 2012 R2 for better protection against credential theft. Any user who is added to the protected users group has following major device protections. Such a user cannot use CredSSP and WDigest so that there would be no clear text credentials, caching of clear text credentials. NTLM hash is not cached, which is absolutely very good. And Kerberos does not use DES or RC4 keys. No caching of clear text creds or long-term keys takes place as well. This means that Kerberosing would not be possible. All right. For example, I actually had a demo for that, actually, right, in my cheat sheet for protected users group. Unfortunately, we are a bit short of time, but I will still explain you what this is. So if you add, let's say, a user to the protected users group, and if you get access to the user's NTLM hash, it would not be possible to use overpass the hash with the NTLM hash or RC4 to actually access that user or access any resources that user. All right, but for that, the domain functional level must also be Server 2012 R2. If that is the case, in that case, there will be no NTLM authentication. So this means that your OPTH would not work. No DES or RC4 keys in Kerberos preauth. AS rep roasting doesn't work. This one means Kerberosing doesn't work. No renewal of TGT beyond the initial 4-hour lifetime. This means that any forging of TGT for this user would be usable for 4 hours. Post that, there are chances of detection. All right, so very useful. It is recommended to add all of your domain admins other than the emergency or break glass users to be added to this group. All right, Microsoft recommends to add all EAs and DAs to this group, but only after testing any potential impact for lockout. So the idea is that you may like to keep a couple of emergency or break class users who are not member of this group. Please keep in mind that having computer or service accounts in this group is useless, as their credentials will always be present on the host machine. These are not enabled by default. These are available to admins. So, for example, if you simply, let's say, want to add a user to the domain admins, to the protected users group, this is the group, protected users. Any user added to that group would have these benefits. All right, how can you enable that? By simply, for example, if we create a new user, let's call that user protected DA. All right, and let's make them a member of the, for example, the domain admins group. Now, all you need to do is to enable all of these protections is to add the user to the protected users group. That's it. Now, this user is a member, and all of these protections will apply. However, one very important thing to keep in mind is that you can still Kerberos a member of the protected users group. This is actually controlled by the client. That is, when you're requesting a TGS, you can forcefully downgrade the encryption to RC4, and the KDC will comply. So please always keep that in mind. Sort of a bypass of protected users group. All right. Now, other protections are isolating administrative workstations. That is, you can use privileged administrative workstations, a hardened workstation that you use to access the jump VM. All right. Do not access the jump VM directly. Then you may also like to use LAPS, local administrator password solution. So even in 2022, a lot of organizations suffer with this problem. Either their local they would be using local administrators, and the local administrator passwords would be same or similar for all the workstations. Now, what labs provide is centralized storage of passwords in Active Directory. So when you configure labs in a forest, there are two attributes that are added to computer objects: MS MCS ADM PWD that stores the local administrator password in clear text, and MS MCS ADM PWD expiration that controls the frequency of password change. So when a machine is managed using labs, the local administrator password is stored in the computer account in clear text. However, by default, only the domain admins can read that. Not even the machine account can read the password. So the machine account can write the passwords, but can't read it. Having said that, I mean, labs is super useful, but please always keep in mind, you can enumerate who can read these passwords in clear text. As a normal user, you can enumerate that. So that provides a list of attracted targets. All right. Then when we talk about time-bound administration, you can use temporary group membership. Once again introduced in Server 2012, make sure that the PAM, Privileged Access Management feature, is turned on the forest level. And then you can specify membership with time to live. In my opinion, I've tried this with attacks like DC Shadow. Once you have this TTL configured, there is absolutely no way to tamper with it. So this is pretty useful to control the membership of the powerful groups like domain admins. Right? Not only that, if you use a lot of partial remoting for administration, take a look at JEA, or just enough administration. So the idea behind JEA is, let's say you have a group of users who just need to, let's say, list services on a domain controller or on some machine. Now, by default, only the administrators can list services on a machine. So what JEA provides you, it provides you the capability to restrict the commands that a user can run on a partial remoting session. So you can have such a granular control that, okay, the users who connect to this JEA endpoint would be able to list only services and processes. That is, they would be able to run only the get service or get process command. That is it. Even with administrative privileges, they would be sandboxed inside a JEA endpoint. Very useful. We personally use this as an organization. We use this in a lot of our backend operations. Very useful. And as far as I know, there has never been a public case where someone broke out of the JEA sandbox. Very useful. If you use a lot of partial remoting for administration, as we do. Then comes the classic tier model. So the classic tier model contains of 3 tiers. Tier 0 contains those accounts, groups, machines, etc. that have privileges across the enterprise, like domain controllers, domain admin, your Azure AD Connect, ADCS, ADFS, your machines with unconstrained delegation, any user that has constrained delegation to a service on the DC, and so on. All of these come in tier 0. Then comes tier 1, which contains probably your application servers, database servers that have significant amount of business value. And finally, tier 2, that contains machines and accounts that have administrative control of your users' workstations, like your help desk, etc., come in tier 2. Please note that these tiers are only for administrative accounts. The mortal users are not even considered here. Now, there are 2 types of restrictions on these: control restrictions and logon restrictions. What admins control is the control restrictions. Where admins can log on to is a logon restrictions. So, for example, an administrator in tier 0 may control what goes into tier 1, but the other way around would not be possible. For control restrictions, it is the reverse. In absolutely no condition, an administrator from tier 0 can log on to tier 1, but the other way around may be possible if required. Now, in such a case, a question arises: how do you administer tier 0? You use the famed Red Forest or ESA. Unfortunately, Microsoft retired ESA a few months back. I mean, in the announcement, they say that Microsoft internally will continue to use ESA, but they do not recommend their clients to use it anymore. They ask them to move to Azure for some of the protection. But the idea behind ESA is pretty simple, but very powerful. Your tier 0 is managed from a Red Forest or an ESA admin forest. There is just one-way trust, so that there is no access back there is SID filtering, there is selective authentication, etc. Right? Now, some of the endpoint-based controls that we can take a look at. Credential card, for example, something that is available without any additional licensing from Microsoft. This is useful in both stopping pass the hash and overpass the hash attacks by restricting both read and write from the memory of the LSS process. That is, it is hard to both extract the credentials and then reuse them. However, please keep in mind that the SSP, the custom SSP from Mimic cards that we saw earlier, that can bypass credential card. Still, it is very useful in my opinion, right? Then comes application allow listing. So as you might have guessed, I have to expand today's session by like close to 15-20 minutes because of the time we have to use in troubleshooting. So those of you who might be running late for anything may take the leave. All right, you can check out the recording later on. There is some interesting discussion that I would like to do with the allow listing. So, and other defense part. So let me extend this for 15 to 20 minutes and you can take a look at the recording later. Right, thanks a lot. Thank you. So when we talk about detection and defense at the endpoint, one very important thing that stands out when we talk about endpoint protection is what is running on your endpoints. How do you know if there is a shell code or a reverse shell or a payload or whatsoever is running on one of the endpoints? So allow listing is one such technique, also known as whitelisting. So the idea behind this is, if I read from Microsoft's documentation, WDAC or device card is designed to harden a system against malware attacks. Its focus is preventing malicious code from running by ensuring only known good code can run. Now, any one of you who has ever dealt with an allow listing solution, now, or let me rephrase, please answer this on Discord. What, according to you, is a known good code? Let's say you're designing an allow listing or you're deploying an allow listing solution for your enterprise. What would you categorize as known good code? What do you think is a known good code? Probably Microsoft signed. Signed, correct? Yes, that's what the answer I was looking for. Or tough thing to keep up, always changes. Any other thoughts on that? Internally sourced and created, signed by my organization, not always MS signed. So I mean, yes, exactly. That is what I was expecting. No one answer. All right, what is known good code? There is nothing called known good code. For example, if you want to talk about Microsoft signed code, take a look at the LOLBEST project, Living Off the Land, Binaries and Scripts. This project lists Microsoft signed binaries and scripts that can be used to run untrusted code. For example, PowerShell.exe, C script, MSHTA, HH, RunDLL32, RegSRV. There are so many, install util, MSBuild. These all are Microsoft signed binaries, but they can still run untrusted code. So there is nothing, I mean, this is the Achilles heel for any allow listing solution. What is known good code? right? I laughed because I read a comment, Mimikatz is the known good code. All right. Now, when it comes to Windows, there are a couple of allow listing solutions, AppLocker and WDEC or device card. Now, AppLocker is cute, but please always keep this in mind. AppLocker cannot protect you from an administrator. If you have admin access on a machine, AppLocker doesn't protect you, all right? For example, look up for some of the blog posts from Odvar. He worked a lot on bypassing AppLocker as administrator. So that's the first time that anyone has said that bot. And now I think that you're actually a bot. So, for example, on dcorp admin SRV, we have AppLocker configured. So if you've completed the lab, check out some of the blog posts by Odware on bypassing or killing AppLocker if you have admin privileges, and see if you can get it to work. All right. So AppLocker is, as I said, it is cute, but not as effective as device guard. Device guard is a very uh, a very powerful and in-depth protection mechanism. All right. However, make sure that if you're using device guard, you solve this. To be honest, I've never ever seen any allow listing solution running in block mode in any enterprise. The best I've seen that it runs in audit mode. And to be honest, even that is absolutely fine. Because when it comes to block, probably your finance would not be using PowerShell.exe, but your IT would be. All right, so run it in audit mode. So that would provide you a very good logging of what runs on your endpoint. So probably at least good for detection, if not for blocking. I mean, it is such a problem that those of you who work on Azure as well, the AAC, Adaptive Application Control, even that uses AppLocker and runs only in audit mode. AAC does not support in Azure the block mode, right? So that's what it is. Then we have tools like ATA or its successor, MDI. So I specifically mentioned ATA or MDI here because there are so many tools. If I pronounce the name correctly, Aoto was acquired by Microsoft a few years back. There was a rush of products. Still, there is a rush of products who specifically detect domain dominance. That is the lot of attacks like we have been discussing, specifically designed to detect those attacks. Now, ATA detects AT or MDI detects attacks like overpass the hash, golden ticket, DC sync. Now, for all of these, there are ways to bypass it. One is always use AES keys, absolutely always. So what ATA detects when we use pass the hash or overpass the hash is encryption downgrade. So if you're using AES keys, then there would be no anomaly, no encryption downgrade, and it would not be detected. For golden ticket, recall our discussion on complying with one, using AES keys, second, complying with the Kerberos policy, the ticket lifetime in the target organization, and we would be absolutely fine. One attack that AT or MDI detects with most confidence is, or one of the attacks that it detects with most confidence is DC sync. Recall we discussed a bypass of it like this. That is, you inject a SID history of the domain controller scope before running DC sync attack, and you would be absolutely fine. Other than that, Just be careful if you are injecting a golden ticket, purge it before you move ahead from the machine. Use silver tickets a lot more than golden ticket. There is a comment that it detects Kerberos. Yes, but only if you use tools like invoke Kerberos or if you use Rubius to quickly request TGS for all the service principal names. Only in that case, ATE or MDI will detect that. So please keep that in mind as well. Now, some event IDs that you may like to keep an eye on. Unfortunately for golden ticket, other than a 4672 from a new machine or for a dormant domain admin, there is not much that you can do. In case of a golden ticket type of attacks, you would be more relying on probably on tools like MDI. Same goes for silver ticket. In fact, silver ticket is so silent. Unless you do something really stupid, like let's say adding a user to the domain admin group. Tools like MDI is blind to it. And unless you're doing, as I said, something very noisy, a silver ticket would probably not lead to detection. How do you detect skeleton key? This is probably the easiest attack to detect from all the ones that we have discussed. So when you use skeleton key, you get this ID by default. It's a system event ID, not a security event. If we have the audit privilege use enabled, then you get a couple of more interesting event IDs. All right, a mitigation, a very good mitigation, not only for skeleton key, but a lot of LSS related attacks is to run the LSS process as a PPL, protected process like. In case of PPL, if an attacker wants to abuse, as we discussed previously in skeleton key, they have to move to device drivers. You can turn on PPL just like that, but you cannot turn it off just like that. All right. However, please make sure that you test stuff before pushing this into production. What is the protection for DSRM and malicious SSP? You have to turn on logging for both of these registry keys, this one and this one. Kerberos. How do you detect Kerberos? Probably one of the hardest attacks to detect, because there is just one event ID that is created on the DC 4769. A Kerberos ticket was requested. And there would be thousands of 4769s on any domain controller. So if you insist on using service accounts for some godforsaken reason, make sure that the passwords are hard to guess and greater than 25 characters. Or better, use MSAs or GMSAs, group managed service accounts. Now, how do you detect 4769s? How do you filter out 4769s from all the noise? So this is taken from a blog post by Trusted Sec. You will like to filter out, let's say, on your SIEM or on your collector where you're collecting the logs, that the service name for a 4769 should not be Kirby TGT. Service name should not end with a dollar so that machine accounts are filtered out. Account name should not be machine at domain, once again to filter out requests from machines. Failure code is 0x0. That is, you do not want to filter out, you want to filter out failures. Only success is something you're interested in. And finally, the ticket encryption type is 0x17. This is RC4, that is easier to decrypt. Someone wanted a ticket encrypted, a TGS encrypted with RC4. All right. So this will filter a lot of 4769s, and it would be easier for you to spot probably a malicious one. So what is a detection against unconstrained delegation? I would say not to use it. This is 2022. Please stop using unconstrained delegation. For all of our ACL-based attacks, we spent a large part discussing ACL-based attacks. So the best defense is to use ADACL scanner for or any other tool, Ping Castle or Bloodhound, for regularly auditing ACLs. Other than that, you can turn on audit policy for some interesting ACLs, let's say admin SD holder, for example. All right. SID filtering we have discussed already, I believe. One more defense that you may like to use, that this is for across forest movement, is selective authentication. So if selective authentication is configured and forest-wide authentication is not used, users can access only the resources that are explicitly shared with each of the user. This is enforced using ACLs and pretty useful. All right. The final thing that I may like to quickly discuss is deception. So deception could be very effective technique. All right. So in my opinion, it is said a lot of times that the defenders always need to be correct, but the attackers need to be correct just one time. I absolutely disagree with that. Instead of that, I would say once an attacker is successful, they are in your backyard. All right. For an attacker, your environment would be an unknown place, a black box. But for you, it is your backyard. It should be if it is not. So it is possible to actually devise a path for attackers to probably have them waste their time or trigger detections. So traditionally, in Active Directory, deception has been limited to leave honey credentials or tokens or canaries, which is effective, but we can take it further. So a few years back, I wrote a simple PowerShell script called deploy deception that can create decoy objects for you. So what is it we are targeting here? We target the adversary mindset for going for the lowest hanging fruit and the elusive superiority they have over defenders. And as a former and current red teamer, I can tell you that this is, and when I was young and proud, I mean, I'm still young and proud, but when I was a bit more naive, I would really get a kick out of bullshitting about defenders. I still see that a lot. I still keep seeing that a lot. You know, you see posts, tweets like how I get domain admin in 20 minutes and things like that. So the attackers are conditioned, let them be good or bad attackers. They have this sense of elusive superiority over defenders that, okay, we are breaking in, we are the cool guys, right? So you would never see a hero who stops 1,000 attacks a day, let's say, because no one gets to know about it. All right. But the cool guy or the girl would be someone who breaks into stuff. All right. And coupled with that, the ability to go for the lowest hanging fruit. And then you would have some interesting opportunities for creating decoy objects. Things like create a user with high privileges, but turn on logging for them, users that have poorly configured ACLs and whatnot. So the idea behind this deploy deception stuff is you turn on aggressive logging, and then you create decoy objects. For example, you can create a decoy user. So what this command from deploy deception is doing, we are creating a user called user manager with some password. And then we deploy user deception. The flag to entice a user is the user's password never expires. And the GUID that we assign to this is this. Now, this GUID is for a property called X500 unique identifier. Now, this will help in triggering a log when someone is using tools like PowerView or AD Explorer. Worth a shot. Or, and please make sure if you use this, you thoroughly test it. I'm pretty sure no one is using this in production. Please don't do that without thoroughly testing it. Or you can, let's say, add a user to the domain admins group, but deny them logon rights. All right. So these are some of the ways. I mean, check out the repository if this is interesting for you. All right. And you may like to read some documentation from Microsoft on securing privileged access and best practices for securing AD. And that would be all from me. All right. Please leave feedback. That helps us in improving the courses. You can find me on Twitter. You can directly reach out to me this way. And yeah, buy more from us. And please reach out to the lab support for any extensions, support, lab access. All right. So we have questions, if any. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Will we get any certification for bootcamp? Yes, but for that you have to complete all the flags. If you complete all the flags, you get a course completion certificate. Let me write that as well. Noted that user 01. Yes, we removed that guy with the code. It was super unstable. And it was probably, so DC shadow was something that we used to have. We still have that in the recorded course. So turned out that only Benjamin, who wrote Mimikatz, Vincent, who wrote Pink Castle, and we were the only 3 guys who were using DC shadow. So I removed that. Thanks a lot, Jake. Thanks a lot. Means a lot to me. So user 01, I noticed that. Let me see. Let me see what we can seriously do to improve that. Thanks a lot, Hikaru. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, everyone. Which modules are most applicable when studying for the exam? I would say then credential extraction and credential enumeration at the very first. Absolutely enumeration. And then credential extraction and replay. That would be the most important modules for the exam. Or I would say persistence, ADCS, are the couple of ones that, as far as exam is concerned, you can ignore them. Thanks a lot, everyone. When is the CRT bet? It is one is planned in March 2022. That is in a couple of months. So that is the date that you can use. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. What is the difference between this and attacking with Linux? I would say once you have done this, there would be no need to go for that one. So attacking with Linux is, as the name suggests, you get a Kali instance and you can use Linux-based tools. But once you have done this, there is no need to actually go for that one. Are there any Server 2016 machines in the exam? Nope. All Server 2019 machines. All right, any other question? Thanks a lot. Thank you, everyone. Fast works. So let me see. Your machine instance has been removed from the forest. Okay, let me see if I can ask my team to do that right away. My team is actually based out of Singapore and in India, so for them it is pretty late. So if it is not fixed yet, we'll do that definitely first thing tomorrow morning. Yes, that is what I would also suggest. Take the exam while the topic is fresh in your mind. Right? So with this, I believe I will take a leave. Please feel free to reach out to us. Absolutely do not think that once the bootcamp is over, we are not reachable. This Discord will stay, or lab support will stay. Reach out directly to me, reach out to the lab team, and we would be, as I said earlier, we respond pretty quick. So this Discord will be active for like forever. I mean, the worst case would be we merge this and others in a single one, and we are not going to delete this. Yes, I mentioned that you please set Bloodhound GUI locally during the exam. No need to try and attempt putting JRE and Neo4j on the exam UI, on the exam student machine. Would be simply waste of time. You can drop a message here, you can DM me, you can email me, Trixieus all the time. So a question is, does CRTE requires experience? I would say yes. I mean, go for CRTE if you understand the concepts in CRTP very well, have done the lab and have cleared the exam. Then go for CRTE. Right? My opinion about PACES is so when I created PACES, that was for absolutely grilling your AD concept. So go for it if you have, to be honest, spare time and you like to question your existence. I mean, to be honest, I created PACES as a torture room. So, I mean, that will really grill your concepts, and very useful for as a playground, to be honest. It is very useful as a playground, a very tough playground though. The question is the red team lab different than the bootcamp lab? Yes, it is, Hoxt. It is. It is very different. Not yet, fast clerks, not yet. Folks, I would say if you want to practice for the exam and you find the lab time not to be enough, then go for a lab extension in place of going for CRT. This would be more aligned to the exam. Oh yes, I think of that as well. I think of doing that with Covenant as well. But the lab manual is, I believe, pretty uh, detailed. And please feel free to ask questions here. I mean, that is, to be honest, the Covenant lab manual is from my team. I only use it, but you can always ask questions here, and let's see if we can answer them. I personally, so the question is, any thoughts about the Empire tool? I personally do not use C2s a lot. I mean, it is a good tool, of course, but no informed opinion, to be honest. Right. So with this, I would say goodbye to you, and please stay in touch. Let's keep exchanging information and knowledge on Discord. And you have my and my team's email as well. So please stay in touch. And then we'll see you later. Bye-bye. Am I the only one who waves goodbye on Zoom calls? Right, so, so bye-bye.